The autumn rain hammered against the windows of the riverside coffee house, creating a rhythmic percussion that most patrons found soothing. Inside, the aroma of freshly ground beans mingled with the sweet scent of pastries, while soft jazz played in the background. It was the kind of place where people came to escape the chaos of the city, to find a moment of peace in their busy lives. Jessica Monroe sat in her usual corner booth, scrolling through her phone with barely concealed irritation. Her designer handbag occupied the seat beside her, and her expression suggested she owned not just the booth, but perhaps the entire establishment. The elderly man had entered quietly, almost apologetically, as if afraid to disturb anyone. His clothes were worn but clean, his gray hair neatly combed despite the rain. He clutched a small wallet in trembling hands, counting coins with the careful attention of someone for whom every penny mattered. The barista smiled kindly at him, her patience evident as he methodically sorted through his change. Behind him, a line had begun to form, but most people waited with understanding. Most, but not all. "This is ridiculous," Jessica muttered loud enough for those around her to hear. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. Her heels clicked sharply as she approached the counter, each step announcing her impatience. "Some of us have actual jobs to get to," she announced, her voice cutting through the cafe's peaceful atmosphere. The old man's hands shook more noticeably now, and a few coins slipped from his fingers, rolling across the floor in different directions. He bent down slowly, painfully, his joints clearly protesting the movement. What happened next would later be replayed on countless social media feeds. As the elderly man struggled to retrieve his scattered coins, Jessica stepped forward and, in a moment of stunning cruelty, kicked several coins away from his reaching fingers. "Maybe if you can't afford coffee, you shouldn't hold up people who can," she snapped. The cafe fell silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to pause. The old man looked up, his eyes glistening with tears that spoke of a lifetime of dignity now wounded. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The bell above the door chimed, and a man entered, shaking rain from his expensive coat. He was tall, perhaps in his mid-40s, with silver threading through his dark hair. His suit was impeccably tailored, and something about his bearing suggested authority. He took in the scene immediately, the woman standing imperiously, the elderly man on the floor, the scattered coins, and the horrified faces of the other customers watching the drama unfold. Marcus Chen hadn't planned to stop at this particular coffee shop. His driver had taken a detour to avoid construction, and something about the cozy establishment had caught his eye through the rain-streaked window. Now, as he surveyed the scene before him, he felt a familiar anger rising, the kind that came from witnessing casual cruelty. He had built his fortune on the principle that how people treated those who could do nothing for them revealed their true character. What he was witnessing now spoke volumes. "Please, I'm sorry," the old man whispered, his voice barely audible as he continued gathering coins with shaking hands. His weathered face was flushed with embarrassment, and Marcus noticed how carefully pressed his old shirt was, despite its frayed collar. This was someone who took pride in his appearance, someone who deserved dignity, regardless of the contents of his wallet. Jessica, meanwhile, had already turned back toward her booth, apparently satisfied that she had made her point about efficiency and the proper order of things. Marcus moved swiftly but calmly, kneeling beside the elderly man in his $3,000 suit without hesitation. "Let me help you, sir," he said gently, his voice carrying natural authority softened by genuine warmth. He began collecting the coins, placing them carefully in the man's palm. The old man looked up, surprise evident in his red-rimmed eyes. "You don't have to," he started, but Marcus shook his head. "I insist. And please, your coffee today is my treat. In fact, order whatever you'd like." "You too," he nodded to the barista. "Get yourself something as well." Jessica had paused, something in the stranger's demeanor catching her attention. She turned back, her expression shifting from dismissal to curiosity. The man helping the elderly patron was clearly wealthy. She could tell from his watch alone, which she recognized as a limited-edition Patek Philippe. Perhaps she had been too hasty in her dismissal of this situation. She smoothed her skirt and prepared her most charming smile, the one that had opened doors throughout her career in commercial real estate. "That's very kind of you," she interjected, her voice suddenly honey-sweet, vastly different from the sharp tone of moments before. "I was actually just about to offer the same thing. I think there was a misunderstanding." Marcus stood slowly, turning to face her fully for the first time. His eyes were dark and assessing, and Jessica felt a flutter of uncertainty under his gaze. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place it. His expression remained neutral, polite even, but there was a quality to his silence that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The old man had risen to his feet with the barista's help, clutching the coins Marcus had returned to him. "Thank you," he said softly to Marcus, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that. Not many people." He trailed off, his meaning clear. Marcus placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "Everyone deserves kindness," he said simply, though his gaze flickered briefly to Jessica. "Especially those who have lived long enough to have earned our respect." The words, though soft, carried an unmistakable rebuke that made Jessica's cheeks flush. Sarah Kim, a junior reporter for the city's business journal, had been sitting in the corner booth working on her laptop when the entire scene unfolded. She had initially been too absorbed in her article to notice, but the commotion had drawn her attention just in time to witness the coin-kicking incident. As a journalist, she had trained herself to observe, to notice details others might miss. And now, as she watched the well-dressed stranger comfort the elderly man, recognition dawned on her with stunning clarity. She knew exactly who he was. Marcus Chun was not just wealthy, he was one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the country. His tech empire, Chun Industries, had revolutionized cloud computing and artificial intelligence applications. Forbes had recently listed him as the 43rd richest person in the world, with a net worth hovering around $28 billion. But more than his wealth, Marcus was known for his philanthropy and his notoriously strict business ethics. Sarah had written several articles about his company's unprecedented employee benefits and his public statements about corporate responsibility. What many people didn't know, but Sarah had discovered during her research, was that Marcus Chun had grown up in poverty. His parents had immigrated with nothing, and his father had worked 3 jobs to keep the family fed. Marcus had attended community college on scholarships, sleeping in his car when he couldn't afford rent. He had never forgotten those struggles, and stories of his generosity toward those in difficult circumstances were legendary among those who knew him personally. This coffee shop incident would be perfectly in character. Jessica, meanwhile, had pulled out her phone, probably to check social media or respond to an email, when her screen lit up with a notification. Sarah watched as the woman's face went pale, then flushed crimson. Jessica's fingers flew across her screen, and Sarah could almost see the moment comprehension struck. The phone nearly slipped from Jessica's hand as she looked up, her eyes moving from the screen to Marcus's face and back again. The color drained from her cheeks entirely, leaving her looking almost ill. "Oh my God," Jessica breathed, the words barely audible but clear enough for Sarah to read her lips. Marcus had turned his attention fully to the elderly man, asking him about his order, but his posture suggested he was perfectly aware of Jessica's dawning recognition. Sarah fought the urge to smile. She had witnessed what journalists called a moment, something that revealed character in its purest form. And this moment was becoming more revealing by the second, as Jessica's careful composure crumbled. The elderly man, still unaware of the identity of his benefactor, was ordering a small coffee and a muffin, his voice apologetic even now. "That's all, really, I don't want to impose," he insisted. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him since he'd entered. "Nonsense. Get the lunch special too. And that chocolate croissant. I've had it here before, it's excellent." He turned to the barista. "Actually, make that 2 of everything. I'll join him." Then he added, loud enough for the entire cafe to hear, "It's my pleasure to have coffee with a gentleman who knows the value of dignity." Jessica's mind raced through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. Marcus Chun. She had just kicked coins away from an elderly man in front of Marcus Chun, a man whose company owned half the commercial real estate in the city, including 3 buildings she was currently trying to secure contracts for. Her firm had been courting Chin Industries for months, trying to get even a small piece of their massive portfolio management business. And she had just displayed the worst possible character judgment directly in front of him. She approached the counter with calculated steps, her professional mask firmly in place despite the panic churning in her stomach. "Mr. Chin," she began, her voice carefully modulated to convey warmth and respect. "I apologize for not recognizing you immediately. I'm Jessica Monroe, with Sterling and Associates Real Estate. We've actually been in contact with your acquisitions team about several properties downtown." She extended her hand, her smile bright and practiced. Marcus looked at her outstretched hand for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long before accepting it with a brief, perfunctory shake. "Ms. Monroe," he acknowledged, his tone professionally cordial, but distinctly cool. "I'm familiar with your firm's proposals." He turned back to the elderly man, effectively dismissing her, and asked, "Would you prefer to sit by the window? The rain makes for a pleasant view." Jessica stood frozen, uncertain whether to retreat or press forward. She had been dismissed before. It came with the territory in her competitive field, but never quite like this, never with such quiet, devastating politeness that somehow felt worse than outright hostility. The elderly man, whose name Sarah had overheard was Thomas Chin, and she wondered if the shared surname was coincidence or something more, seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "You really don't need to go to all this trouble," he protested weakly. "I was just having a difficult morning. My pension check was delayed, and He trailed off, embarrassed to be explaining his financial situation to strangers. Marcus's expression softened immediately, and he guided the older man toward a table with gentle insistence. Jessica made one more attempt, her voice taking on a more urgent quality. "Mr. Chin, I wonder if I could have just a moment of your time to discuss." Marcus turned, and the look in his eyes stopped her mid-sentence. It wasn't anger exactly, but something colder and more final. "Ms. Monroe, I make it a policy never to conduct business in venues where I've witnessed someone being cruel to others. It's served me well over the years. Helps me understand who people truly are when they think it doesn't matter." The words were delivered calmly, almost conversationally, which somehow made them cut deeper. The cafe's other patrons had been watching the drama unfold with varying degrees of obviousness. Some pretended to be absorbed in their phones or laptops, but their attention was clearly fixed on the unfolding scene. Others watched openly, a few even recording on their phones, though Sarah suspected those videos would be online within the hour. She made a mental note to check social media later. This was exactly the kind of story that went viral, especially involving someone as prominent as Marcus Chun and showcasing his values in action. As Marcus and Thomas settled at their table, away from Jessica's increasingly desperate proximity, Sarah's journalistic instincts were buzzing. The shared last name couldn't be coincidence. She opened her laptop and began searching, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, she had her answer, and it made the entire situation even more poignant. Thomas Chun was Marcus's uncle, his father's older brother, who had also immigrated to America decades ago but whose life had taken a different trajectory. The family history she uncovered through public records and previous interviews was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Thomas had been a successful small business owner once, running a restaurant that served the immigrant community. But a series of misfortunes, a serious illness, lack of insurance, a fire that destroyed his establishment, had left him in financial ruin. Marcus's father had tried to help, but he had passed away 15 years ago. Marcus had attempted to support his uncle, but Thomas, proud and independent, had refused what he saw as charity from his nephew, wanting to maintain his dignity by taking care of himself. From her vantage point, Sarah could see the two men talking, their body language speaking of familial connection despite whatever distance had grown between them. Marcus leaned forward, his expression intent and concerned. Thomas's hands moved expressively as he spoke, occasionally gesturing in a way that clearly indicated protest or refusal. She couldn't hear their words, but she could read the emotional subtext clearly enough. This was a family negotiation that had probably played out many times before. Jessica had retreated to her booth, but hadn't left, apparently unable to tear herself away from the unfolding situation despite her obvious discomfort. Sarah watched as the woman alternated between staring at her phone and sneaking glances at Marcus's table, her expression cycling through embarrassment, calculation, and what might have been genuine regret. It was difficult to tell what was authentic and what was simply fear of professional consequences. Sarah had seen enough corporate climbers to recognize the type, but she also knew that moments like these could genuinely change people if they allowed themselves to feel the full weight of their actions. The barista brought over the food Marcus had ordered, and Sarah noticed how Marcus made a point of thanking her warmly, asking her name, Melissa, and complimenting the cafe's atmosphere. It was clear that this wasn't performative kindness, but rather how he treated everyone. Melissa blushed at the attention, probably recognizing him as well, but she maintained her professional composure. "The chocolate croissants are fresh from this morning," she offered with a smile. "They're my favorite too." Marcus grinned. "Then please bring 3. One for yourself when you have a moment." As the two men ate, Sarah continued her research, pulling up articles about Chin Industries' latest initiatives. She discovered that Marcus had recently announced a new program providing microloans and business mentorship to senior citizens looking to start or restart small businesses. The program was specifically designed to help people like Thomas, people who had fallen through the cracks of the traditional financial system. The irony wasn't lost on her. Marcus was trying to help people in his uncle's situation on a systemic level, even as his uncle stubbornly refused personal assistance. At their windowside table, Marcus and Thomas were deep in conversation, their voices low but animated. "Mark, you didn't have to embarrass yourself by helping me like that," Thomas was saying, his pride evident in the set of his jaw. "I had enough money. I was just taking my time to count it properly. These hands don't work as fast as they used to." His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, betraying the age he was trying to downplay. Marcus reached across the table, steadying his uncle's hand with his own. "Uncle Thomas, you weren't the one who should be embarrassed in that situation," Marcus said quietly. "And I didn't help you because I thought you couldn't handle it. I helped you because no one deserves to be treated the way that woman treated you. Not you, not anyone." His voice carried the weight of personal experience, of remembered humiliations from his own past. "Do you remember when I was 17 and working at that grocery store? How the manager used to mock the way Dad spoke English?" Thomas's eyes grew wet at the memory. "Your father never complained, but I could see it hurt him. He was a university professor back home, you know. Here, he was just another immigrant who packed groceries." He shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry you had to see me like this, Mark. I know you've tried to help over the years. I need to feel like I'm still standing on my own 2 feet. Can you understand that?" His voice cracked slightly, revealing the emotion beneath his stubborn exterior. Marcus nodded, understanding flooding his features. "I do understand. Dad was the same way, that stubborn chin pride." He smiled sadly. "But Uncle Thomas, there's a difference between accepting help and losing your dignity. You raised 3 children working 2 jobs after Aunt Linda passed. You put all of them through college. You volunteered at the community center teaching kids to read for 20 years. You've earned the right to let people who love you make things a little easier." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "At least let me help you with some of the medical bills from last year. Not as charity, as family." Thomas was silent for a long moment, staring out at the rain. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You're so much like your father, you know. He had the same way of making generosity sound like common sense." He turned back to Marcus, tears now flowing freely down his weathered cheeks. "I've been so proud of you, watching everything you've built. But I've also been afraid that my problems would burden you, afraid that people would say I was taking advantage of your success, afraid that I'd become just another person asking you for money." "You could never be just another person to me," Marcus said firmly. "You're family, and between you and me, having all this money is complicated. Half the people I meet want something from me, and the other half think I don't deserve it." But you've never treated me any differently than when I was that broke college kid sleeping in his car and borrowing $20 for gas. That's worth more than any business deal I've ever closed. He pulled out his phone, opening an app. Now, I'm transferring money to your account. Consider it repayment for all those dinners you fed me when I was starting my company and couldn't afford both food and server fees. While Marcus and Thomas continued their conversation, Sarah had been monitoring her social media feeds, and what she discovered made her sit up straight. The coffee shop incident was already going viral. Multiple patrons had recorded portions of the encounter, and the videos were spreading across platforms with remarkable speed. The hashtags #coffeeshopkindness and #billionaireHumility were trending, along with less flattering tags directed at Jessica, like #entitledcustomer and #coinkicker. One video, shot from an angle that captured Jessica's face clearly, had already garnered over 2 million views. The comments section was brutal. Imagine being this cruel to an elderly person. This is what privilege looks like. I hope her employer sees this. Marcus Chun is a class act. This is how you treat people. Several comments identified Jessica by name, and a few had already tagged Sterling and Associates' official social media accounts. Sarah winced, knowing what was coming next for Jessica, regardless of how she felt about the woman's behavior. Sarah's phone buzzed with a call from her editor. "Please tell me you're still at that coffee shop," he said, without preamble. "The Chin story is everywhere, and we need something more substantial than these videos. Did you see what happened? Can you get a statement?" Sarah confirmed she had witnessed everything and was currently in the same establishment as Marcus Chin. Her editor's excitement was palpable. This is exactly the kind of human interest angle people want. The billionaire who never forgot where he came from. Get me a story by end of day. Across the cafe, Jessica's phone was also buzzing incessantly. Sarah watched as the woman's face grew increasingly pale with each notification. Finally, Jessica answered a call, and though Sarah couldn't hear the words, the body language told the story clearly enough. Jessica's shoulders slumped, her hand went to her forehead, and she began speaking rapidly, her free hand gesturing frantically. It was the unmistakable posture of someone receiving very bad news and trying desperately to explain themselves. The call ended, and Jessica sat motionless for a moment before gathering her things with shaking hands. She stood, seeming to make a decision, and walked directly to Marcus's table. Sarah tensed, her reporter instincts fully engaged. This was either going to be a genuine moment of accountability or a desperate attempt at damage control. She positioned her phone discreetly, ready to record if needed, though she felt slightly uncomfortable about it. Still, this was news, and the public clearly had an interest in the story. "Mr. Chun, mister?" Jessica looked at Thomas, realizing she didn't know his name. "Sir," she continued, her voice unsteady, "I need to apologize. What I did was inexcusable. I was rude, cruel, and completely out of line." She paused, seeming to struggle with the next words. "I just received a call from my firm. I've been suspended pending an investigation, and honestly, I deserve it. But that's not why I'm apologizing. I'm apologizing because I was wrong, because I hurt someone, and because I represented everything I claim not to be." Tears began streaming down her face, smudging her carefully applied makeup. Marcus studied Jessica for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Thomas looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to speak. The cafe had gone silent again, everyone watching. This new development in the drama that had unfolded in their midst. Sarah held her breath, wondering how Marcus would respond. She had covered enough stories about powerful people to know that this moment could go several ways: magnanimous forgiveness, cold dismissal, or something in between. "Ms. Monroe," Marcus finally said, his tone neither warm nor cold, "I appreciate you taking responsibility for your actions. That takes more courage than many people have." He gestured to the empty chair at their table. "Please sit down." Jessica hesitated, clearly not expecting this response, then sat gingerly on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee at any moment. Marcus continued, "What you did was wrong. You humiliated someone who deserved respect, and you did it because you saw him as beneath your consideration. That kind of behavior reveals character flaws that don't disappear with a simple apology. Jessica nodded, her face crumpling. I know. I don't have an excuse. I was stressed about a deal I'm about to lose, I was running late, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. I've become someone I don't like very much. Her admission seemed genuine, raw in a way that her earlier polish had not been. My father was a janitor, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out. He worked nights cleaning office buildings so I could go to college. I swore I'd never forget where I came from, but somewhere along the way I did. I started measuring people by their wealth, their usefulness to me. I became exactly what I used to despise. Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice gentle. We all lose our way sometimes. The question is what we do when we realize it. He looked at Marcus. I remember when your father first came to this country. Some people treated him terribly because of his accent, his lack of money. But he never let it make him bitter. He taught you and your sisters to judge people by their hearts, not their wallets. Maybe this young woman needed this wake-up call, just like I needed today to remind me that accepting help isn't weakness. Marcus nodded slowly, seeming to come to a decision. Ms. Monroe, I'm going to be honest with you. What happened today cost you professionally, and that's appropriate. Actions have consequences, and public behavior, especially cruel behavior, should be held accountable. But I don't believe in permanent condemnation for anyone willing to genuinely change. He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. This is the contact information for a nonprofit I support. They run programs helping elderly people maintain their independence and dignity. If you're serious about changing, volunteer there. Learn from the people you serve. Really listen to their stories. Jessica took the card with trembling hands, staring at it as if it were both a lifeline and a judgment. Why would you help me after what I did? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus glanced at his uncle before responding. Because someone helped me when I was at my lowest point. Because I believe people can change if they choose to. And because my uncle just reminded me that holding on to anger and pride, even justified anger, doesn't serve anyone well. He stood, preparing to leave. Whether you take that opportunity or not is entirely up to you. But if you do volunteer, actually do the work. Don't go for appearances or to rehabilitate your image. Go to learn. Thomas rose as well, and Marcus helped him with his coat. Jessica remained seated, still holding the business card, tears still falling. Thank you, she managed to say. I will. I promise I will. Marcus nodded acknowledgement, but didn't respond further. He turned to the barista, Melissa, who had been watching from behind the counter. Could you please ensure Mr. Thomas Chin has an account here? I'd like to establish a credit for him for coffee and meals. He named a generous amount that made Thomas start to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. Uncle Thomas, let me do this. Not because you need charity, but because I want to. Please. As Marcus and Thomas prepared to leave, Sarah approached them, introducing herself as a journalist. Mr. Chun, I witnessed everything that happened here today. Would you be willing to provide a statement? Marcus considered her request carefully, noting her credentials and her professional demeanor. What publication do you write for? He asked. When Sarah told him, he nodded. I've read your work. You wrote that piece about income inequality and its impact on elderly populations. It was well-researched and compassionate. Sarah felt a flush of pride at the recognition. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you, especially given what I witnessed today. She glanced at Thomas. I think people would be interested in hearing about not just what happened, but why you responded the way you did. The videos are already viral, but they don't capture the full context. Marcus exchanged a look with Thomas, who shrugged. Your story to tell, nephew. Though maybe leave out some of the more embarrassing parts about my stubborn pride. Marcus smiled. I'll give you a statement, but not about me. The story shouldn't be about a billionaire doing something any decent person would do. The story should be about how we treat our elderly population, about the dignity every person deserves regardless of their economic status, and about the fact that my uncle, and millions like him, worked their entire lives, contributed immeasurably to their communities, and now struggled to afford basic necessities. That's the real story. His voice had taken on the passionate tone of someone speaking about a cause close to his heart. Sarah was already taking notes, recognizing that she had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple viral incident. Would you be willing to discuss your new microloan program for seniors? The one your company announced last month? Marcus nodded. Absolutely. But I'd also like to discuss why such programs are necessary in the first place. The systemic failures that leave people like my uncle choosing between medication and meals, between heating their homes and paying rent. This isn't about individual charity. It's about societal responsibility. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah conducted one of the most rewarding interviews of her career. Marcus spoke eloquently about his vision for elder care, about the dignity of aging, and about how his own family's struggles had shaped his philosophy on wealth and responsibility. Thomas added his own perspective, talking about the isolation and invisibility that often accompanies aging, especially for those without significant resources. Their conversation was thoughtful, nuanced, and exactly the kind of content Sarah knew would resonate with readers far beyond the initial viral moment. As they concluded, Marcus added one final thought. I hope people won't focus too much on vilifying Ms. Monroe. Yes, her behavior was wrong, but she apologized and seems genuinely committed to changing. That's more than many people do. The real question is what all of us do when we see cruelty, whether we're willing to intervene, and how we treat those we encounter every day whose society has rendered invisible. That's the conversation worth having. His words were measured, showing the kind of wisdom that had made him successful in business, but also respected as a thinker on social issues. In the weeks that followed the coffee shop incident, the ripple effects spread far wider than anyone had anticipated. Sarah's article, published 2 days after the event, went viral in its own right, generating millions of reads and sparking conversations about elder care, corporate responsibility, and the nature of true character. News outlets picked up the story, and Marcus found himself invited to speak on several prominent podcasts and news programs about his initiatives supporting senior citizens. Chun Industries' microloan program saw applications increase by 300%, with thousands of elderly entrepreneurs seeking funding for small businesses and projects. Marcus used the platform to pressure other tech billionaires to invest in similar programs, turning his personal response to his uncle's situation into a movement. Several other major corporations announced competing initiatives, each trying to demonstrate their commitment to social responsibility. The incident had sparked what business journals were calling the dignity economy movement. Jessica Monroe's journey took an unexpected turn as well. She did volunteer at the nonprofit Marcus had recommended, initially perhaps to rehabilitate her image, but something genuine shifted in her during those first few weeks. Sarah followed up with her for a subsequent article and found a woman genuinely transformed by her experience. Jessica had started a blog documenting her volunteer work and her own evolution, writing honestly about privilege, empathy, and the ways successful people can lose touch with basic humanity. Her willingness to be vulnerable about her failures resonated with many readers. Sterling and Associates eventually reinstated Jessica after a month's unpaid suspension, but she made an unexpected decision. She left the firm to take a position with a nonprofit real estate organization that helps secure affordable housing for seniors. The pay cut was significant. She went from a 6-figure salary to earning less than half that amount. But as she told Sarah in a follow-up interview, I finally feel like I'm using my skills for something that matters. Every time I help someone find a safe, affordable place to live, I think about that day in the coffee shop and how differently it could have gone if Mr. Chun hadn't been there. Thomas Chun, after much resistance, finally accepted more direct help from his nephew. Marcus didn't just pay his medical bills. He helped Thomas open a small consulting business advising immigrant-owned restaurants, drawing on Thomas's decades of experience. The business provided Thomas with both income and, more importantly, a sense of purpose and dignity. He became one of the faces of Marcus's microloan program, speaking at events about the importance of supporting elderly entrepreneurs and the value of multigenerational knowledge transfer. The coffee shop where it all began became something of a local landmark. Melissa, the barista, told reporters that people came specifically to see where the incident had happened, though most were respectful about it. The owner reported a significant increase in business and decided to implement a program offering free coffee to any senior citizen who came in. Inspired by Marcus's example, several regular customers began their own practice of random kindness, and the cafe developed a reputation as a place where community and compassion were valued as much as good coffee. Sarah's career received a significant boost from her coverage of the story. She was offered a column at a major national publication, where she continued to write about issues of inequality, aging, and corporate responsibility. She maintained contact with both Marcus and Jessica, occasionally following up on their ongoing initiatives. Her original article won several journalism awards, but more importantly, it had sparked meaningful conversation and actual change, the dream of every serious journalist. Perhaps the most significant outcome was the conversation the incident sparked in homes and workplaces across the country. People began sharing their own stories of witnessing or experiencing casual cruelty, and more importantly, of choosing to intervene or wishing they had. Teachers used the incident as a teaching moment in schools, discussing empathy, consequence, and the courage to stand up for others. The phrase, "be the Marcus in the room," became shorthand for choosing kindness and intervention over indifference. In a world increasingly fragmented and polarized, the coffee shop incident reminded people of fundamental truths: that every person deserves dignity, that wealth and status say nothing about character, that cruelty diminishes everyone it touches, and that genuine change, both personal and societal, is always possible. It was a simple moment in a small coffee shop on a rainy day, but its impact echoed far beyond those walls, touching thousands of lives and reminding everyone who heard the story that how we treat the most vulnerable among us defines who we truly are.